Good morning and welcome to Daily Bible Canada, where once again we're bringing you your daily dose of the Bible that we know you require and you long for. Because I think at some point during every day we all long or require for that certain verse that's going to hit us. And I'm sure of it that a verse that we're going to read today is going to hit you and kind of show you something that you haven't seen, kind of open your eyes in a way. So let's get started. Last time we finished, we were in Romans chapter 2, and we were kind of talking a little bit about God's righteous judgment and the Jews and the law, I guess. And now we're going to move on to chapter 3, and we're going to talk about no one is righteous is our topic for today. No one is righteous. And we're going to start, though, by talking about God's faithfulness, because I feel like we need to understand His faithfulness in order to understand how no one is righteous. And then we're going to end by combining the both and learning about righteousness through faith. So we're going to have 3 subtopics today, but our main topic is no one is righteous. So now, if we start in chapter 3, verse 1, it says, "What advantage then hath the Jew, or what profit is there of circumcision?" And verse 2 says, "Much every way, chiefly because that unto them were committed the oracles of God." So a lot of the times, Paul was actually a very knowledgeable and a very, very well-trained Pharisee. And, it isn't always a person's knowledge or Jewish status that leads them to salvation, which we're told us in Philippians 3, verses 3 to 8. But Paul still kind of notices a crucial advantage to his Jewish background, and mostly here the oracles of God, as he calls them. So verse 3 tells us, "For what if some did not believe? Shall their unbelief make the faith of God without effect?" So what he's trying to point out here is, if a lot of people didn't have faith, does that mean that their lack of faith will kind of numb God's faithfulness? And in verse 4 he says, "God forbid, yea, let God be true, but every man a liar, as it is written, that thou mightest be justified in thy sayings, and mightest overcome when thou art judged." So now he's kind of telling us, no, not at all, not possible, because God's true, and mostly every man is a liar at some point. And then he goes to tell us, as it is written. And then he says, that thou mightest be justified in thy sayings, and mightest overcome when thou art judged. In verse 5 he says, "But if our unrighteousness commend the righteousness of God, what shall we say? Is God unrighteous who take vengeance? I speak as a man." So here he's kind of saying, if our unrighteousness brings out God's righteousness more clearly, how are we going to react? What are we going to say to this? Are we going to kind of react and say that God is unjust in bringing his wrath on us? And here he says, in brackets, he's basically using a human argument. So in verse 6 he says, "God forbid, for then how shall God judge the world?" And here he's kind of saying, certainly not. If it was possible, how could God judge the world? And then in verse 7 he says, "For if the truth of God hath more abounded through my lie unto his glory, why yet am I also judged as a sinner?" And basically what he's saying here is, someone's going to argue, or someone may argue, if their own falsehood enhances God's truthfulness and so increases his glory, then why are they still being condemned as a sinner? And then in verse 8 he says, "And not rather, as we be slanderously reported, and as some affirm, that we say, let us do evil, that good may come, whose damnation is just." So now here he's kind of saying, why not say, as we're kind of being slanderously reported as saying, and as some claim that we say, let us do evil, that that good is going to be the result. Those people, their condemnation is deserved. So now we're going to move into our no one is righteous topic. So we just learned about God's faithfulness. So I hope you guys took something out of that. So that was Romans chapter 3, verses 1 through 8. And now we're going to focus on verses 9 through 20. And that's going to be our no one is righteous. And then we're going to talk about righteousness through faith, which I feel is another very important topic. So verse 9 tells us, "What then? Are we better than they? No, in no wise, for we have been proved, both Jews and Gentiles, that they are all under sin." Actually, we're going to read verses 9 through 20, and then we're going to come back and walk through each of them. So verse 10 says, "As it is written, there is none righteous, no, not one." Verse 11 says, "There is none that understandeth, there is none that seeketh after God." 12, "They are all gone out of the way, they are together become unprofitable, there is none that doeth good, no, not one." And then verse 13 says, "Their throat is an open sepulchre, and their tongues they have used deceit, the poison of asps under their lips. Verse 14 says, whose mouth is full of cursing and bitterness. 15, their feet are swift to shed blood. 16, destruction and misery are in their ways. 17, and the way of peace have they not known. 18, there is no fear of God before their eyes. 19, now we know that what things soever the law saith, it saith to them who are under the law, that every mouth may be stopped, and all the world may become guilty before God. 20. Therefore, by the deeds of the law there shall be no flesh be justified in his sight, for by the law is the knowledge of sin. So, Scripture had already kind of addressed the subject of whether Jews or Gentiles had a better understanding of God's love and righteousness. And here's Paul's kind of quoting a series of Old Testament scriptures. Most of them kind of come from Psalms, but there's some of them that come from Isaiah and Ecclesiastes. And they're used to show the widespread influence of sin. So let's go back through and walk through each of them. What then, this is verse 9, what then, are we better than they? No, in no wise, for we have been before proved to both Jews and Gentiles that they are all under sin. So here's what he's kind of trying to say is, what's going to be the conclusion? Are we better? And then he kind of says, no, it's not at all. We have already made the charge that Jews and Gentiles are all basically the same under sin, is what he's trying to say there. Then verse 10 says, as it is written, there is none righteous, no, not one. So now what he's kind of getting at here is he's saying, as it is written, there is no one righteous, not even one. Then 11 says, there is none that understandeth, there is none that seeketh after God. So this is still as it is written. This is still something that's written somewhere. I don't exactly know where this comes from, but we'll find out eventually. He then says, there is no one who understands, no one who's going to seek God. And then in verse 12 it says, they are all gone out of the way, they are together become unprofitable, there is none that doeth good, no, not one. So basically what he's saying here is, basically all of them turned away. They have turned away. They have become worthless together. And there is not one of them that does good, not even one. Okay, and then in verse 13 he says, their throat is an open sepulchre. With their tongues they have used deceit. The poison of asps is under their lips. So basically what he's saying here is that their throats are basically open graves, I guess. And their tongues practice deceit. And the poison of vipers is on their lips. Verse 14 says, whose mouth is full of cursing and bitterness. And now he's kind of saying their mouths are full of cursing and bitterness. You know, that's basically pretty much self-explanatory. Verse 15, their feet are swift to shed blood. So basically what is, it's self-explanatory, right? There's not much to explain there. 16, destruction and misery are in their ways. Which is basically, I guess, what he's trying to say there is like vandalism, I guess. Verse 17 says, and the way of peace have they not known. So now what he's trying to say here is they have no God. They have no fear of God in their eyes. There's no fear of God from them. Verse 19 says, now we know that what things soever the law saith, it saith to them who are under the law, that every mouth may be stopped, and all the world may become guilty before God. So now he's saying, like, we're now realizing that the law said that whatever the law says, it's kind of saying it only to those who are under the law or who listen to the law. But basically every mouth is going to become quiet and the whole world will be held accountable to God. Then in 20 he says, therefore by the deeds of the law there shall no flesh be justified in his sight, for by the law is the knowledge of sin. So here he's kind of saying is no one's going to become declared righteous in God's sight just because they observe the law. Rather, though, they have to, because of the law, they become kind of conscious of sin. So then let's move on to 21 here, where we're getting into our righteousness through faith section here. And this is where it's going to start to connect the dots a little bit if you're not understanding it. So 21 says, but now the righteousness of God without the law is manifested, being witnessed by the law and the prophets. So he's saying here, a righteousness that has been given from God, separated from the law, basically has been made known, that the law and the prophets testify. And then in 22, we're actually going to read 22 to 24 here. 22 says, even the righteousness of God, which is by faith of Jesus Christ, unto all, and upon all them that believe, for there is no difference. And 23 says, for all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. And 24 says, being justified freely by his grace through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus. So from God's perspective, when we look at it, there's really no difference between a Jew and a Gentile. The one similarity is that they're both really sinful, and really there's no difference in how they can have a proper, true relationship with God. He justifies them freely, but mostly out of grace, because the death of Jesus paid for their sins, so he really can't judge them anymore. That's why he sent his son to die on the cross, was, so he could justify out of grace. A lot of the times, though, people are unable to do anything to contribute to their own justification, so God ends up doing it by his grace. A lot of the times, we don't actually deserve it, but, he loves us and will initiate the action. So 25 and 26 we're going to read now. 25 says, whom God hath set forth to be a propitiation through faith in his blood, to declare his righteousness for the remission of sins that are past, through the forbearance of God. 26 says, to declare, I say, at this time his righteousness, that he might be just, and the justifier of him which believeth in Jesus. So Jesus' sacrifice, which is his blood when he died on the cross, was the necessary kind of atonement that was to pay for the sins of humankind, which it was to pay for the sins of humankind in the past, for the sins of humankind in the present, and for the sins of humankind in the future. And the future represents us, our generation, because we are in the future from then. The sacrifice is actually referred to as the propitiation. The great importance of such a sacrifice is that it appeases God's wrath so that we don't receive the condemnation that we actually truly deserve deep down. God doesn't just overlook our sins, though. They are fully atoned for from this point forward. But, he had left sins unpunished in the past, knowing that justice would be fulfilled when Jesus paid the price for them. So then verse 27 tells us, where is boasting then? It is excluded by what law? Of works? Nay, but by the law of faith. So Paul has already kind of clarified that, the justification has nothing to do with the works of people. Instead, is an act of God on the sacrificial death of Jesus Christ. And observing the law is actually, to be honest with you, it's a positive action, but it has nothing to do with justification. So 27 to 31, we'll reread 27 and finish at 31. So just quickly here, we'll read 27. Where is boasting then? It is excluded by what law? Of works? Nay, but by the law of faith. 28 says, therefore we conclude that a man is justified by faith, without the deeds of the law. 29 says, is he the God of Jews only? Is he not also of the Gentiles? Yes, of the Gentiles also. Verse 30 says, seeing it is one God, which shall justify the circumcision by faith, and uncircumcision through faith. Do we then make the void the law through faith? God forbid, yea, we establish the law. So pretty much what he's just trying to say here, to simplify it and end us off, is that Paul's kind of emphasizing that people are justified only by faith. And then in this section, he kind of returns to a question and answer format. So folks, that ends today's session, and I'm so glad you guys got to join us today. I hope you guys truly have something to take back again from today, and I can't wait to have tomorrow's session with you guys. Tomorrow we will focus on chapter 4 of Romans, and we're going to talk about how Abraham was justified by faith, and we'll get more into that. So folks, thanks for tuning in today. This is Brandon Med saying God bless, and good night.